What's up, guys? It's Cassie and Sara, and today we're talking about the vile story of the Cleveland torso murderer.
If you like watching murder mysteries, make sure you hit that subscribe button and keep on watching. The Cleveland torso murderer, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, was an unidentified serial killer who was active in Cleveland, Ohio, United States in the 1930s. The killings were characterized by the dismemberment of 12 known victims and the disposal of their remains in the impoverished neighborhood of Kingsbury Run. Most victims came from an area east of Kingsbury Run called the Roaring Third, known for its bars, gambling dens, and brothels. Another name for this area was Hobo Jungle, as it was home to many vagrants. Despite an investigation of the murders, which at one time was led by famed lawman Eliot Ness, the Cleveland's public safety director, the murderer was never apprehended.
Cleveland, Ohio, his victims came from, were like hobo-ish.
Hobos.
Like, yeah, they might not have all been hobos, but that's where he usually picked them up.
Yeah, just like the general area. It was just like a little taste of what's to come.
Yeah.
The official number of murders attributed to the Cleveland torso murderer is 12, although recent research has shown there could have been as many as 20. The 12 known victims were killed between 1935 and 1938. Some investigators, including lead Cleveland detective Peter Merlo, believe that there may have been 13 or more victims in the Cleveland, Youngstown, and Pittsburgh areas between the 1920s and 1950s. Two strong candidates for addition to the initial list of those killed are the unknown victim nicknamed Lady of the Lake, found on September 5th, 1934, and Robert Robertson, found on July 22nd, 1950. The victims of the torso murderer were usually drifters whose identities were never determined, although there were a few exceptions. Victims numbers 2, 3, and 8 were identified as Edward Andrassy, Florence Polillo, and possibly Rose Wallace. The victims appeared to be lower-class individuals, easy prey in Depression-era Cleveland. Many were known as working poor who had nowhere else to live but the ramshackle Depression-era shanty towns, or Hooversvilles, in the area known as Cleveland Flats. The torso murderer always beheaded and often dismembered his or her victims, occasionally severing the victim's torso in half or severing their appendages. In many cases, the cause of death was the decapitation or dismemberment itself. Most of the male victims were castrated. Some victims showed evidence of chemical treatment being applied to their bodies. Many of the victims were found after a considerable period of time following their deaths, occasionally in excess of a year. In an era when forensic science was largely in its infancy, these factors further complicated identification, especially since the heads were often undiscovered. During the time of the official murders, Eliot Ness held the position of Public Safety Director of Cleveland, a position with authority over the police department and ancillary services, including the fire department. While Ness had little to do with the investigation, his reputation as leader of the Untouchables has made him an irresistible character in modern torso murder lore. Ness did contribute to the arrest and interrogation of one of the prime suspects, Dr. Francis E. Sweeney. In addition, he personally conducted raids into hobo shanties and eventually burned down Kingsbury Run, from which the killer took his or her victims. At one point in time, the killer taunted Ness by placing the remains of 2 victims in full view of his office in City Hall.
They think there's like 12, there's 12 victims that they know of, but they think there's probably a lot more because the murders that they found were like so close.
Yeah, like the MO of those murders kind of.
But they couldn't necessarily say, oh, it was the torso murder.
Yeah, because forensic science was in its infancy.
Well, it was the 1930s, so.
They need to get their stuff together.
But we've seen that some of the forensic stuff in like the 1990s, 2000s have not been so hot. So I can imagine their like forensic science is like, yeah, no, I have no idea. Like that's about it. Like, let me just look at this piece of flesh.
Be like, nope. Oh, nope. Don't know if that's Jack or not. Oh yeah, the chemical treatments to the skin.
That makes my skin crawl. Like, nope. I find it kind of funny, even though it's not really funny, that the killer taunted Eliot Ness by putting dead bodies in view of his office. Could you imagine? You're like in your office, you're a detective or whatever, and you look out your window and you see a couple dead bodies. You're like,
I'm like, is nobody else seeing this?
just me? Am I losing it?
I'm like, no, it's like you're at your desk doing your work, and all of a sudden you look up and you're like,
what the fuck?
Most researchers considered there to be 12 victims. New evidence suggests a woman dubbed the Lady of the Lake could be included. Only 2 victims were positively identified. The other 10 victims were 6 John Does and 4 Jane Does. The first victim that was discovered was Edward Andrassy, but it is possible he was the second victim to be murdered. He had been decapitated and emasculated, and his head was also recovered. The second victim that was discovered was John Doe 1, but he was probably the first victim to be killed. He was emasculated and decapitated, and his head was also recovered. His skin was treated with a chemical agent that caused it to become reddish and leathery. The third victim was Florence Polillo. Her body had been dismembered and her head was recovered, similar to the other victims. The 8th victim that was discovered was Jane Doe 2, who could also possibly be the 6th murder victim. She was the only black victim. Her body was decapitated and missing a rib. Her head was also recovered. The last victim discovered was John Doe 6, but he was potentially the 10th murder victim. He was decapitated and his head was found in a can.
This is confusing.
Yes.
Because, like we said, so there were 6 males, 6 John Does, and there were what?
4 females.
Yeah,
4 Jane Does.
So that's why it's like, what? But they also don't really know the order either. Because they don't know who they are. They're like...
okay, when I did the research for this, it had, this chart of the victims. And, it went in order of the discovery of, the bodies, who they were. So, Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2. Yeah, but
they think that, maybe because of, their decomposition and stuff like that, it could be different. So that's why it says possibly number whatever.
Yeah, I find it interesting that only 1 black victim.
Yeah, but maybe it was whoever she, they, whatever, could get their hands on. You know, whoever was more gullible to get close enough to this person or whatever.
Several non-canonical victims are commonly discussed in connection with the Torso murderer. The first was nicknamed the Lady of the Lake and was found near Euclid Beach on the Lake Erie shore of September 5th, 1934, at virtually the same spot as canonical victim number 7. Some researchers of the Torso murderer's victim count the Lady of the Lake as victim number 1 or victim 0. The headless body of an unidentified male was found in a boxcar in Newcastle, Pennsylvania on July 1st, 1936. 3 headless victims were found in boxcars near McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania on May 3rd, 1940. All bore similar injuries to those inflicted by the Cleveland killer. Dismembered bodies were also found in the swamps near Newcastle between the years 1921 and 1934 and between 1939 and 1942. In September 1940, an article in the Newcastle News refers to the killer as the Murder Swamp Killer. The almost identical similarities between the victims in Newcastle to those in Cleveland, Ohio, coupled with the similarities between Newcastle's murder swamp and Cleveland's Kingsbury Run, both of which were directly connected by a Baltimore and Ohio railroad line, were enough to convince Cleveland detective Peter Merlot that the Newcastle murders were the work of the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Merlot was convinced the connection was the railroad that ran twice a day between the 2 cities. He often rode the railroads undercover looking for clues of the killer's identity. On July 22, 1950, the body of 41-year-old Robert Robertson was found at a business at 2138 Davenport Avenue in Cleveland. Police believed that he had been dead 6 to 8 weeks and appeared to have been intentionally decapitated. His death appeared to fit the profile of other victims. He was estranged from his family, had an arrest record and a drinking problem, and was on the fringes of society. Despite widespread newspaper coverage linking the murder to the crimes in the 1930s, detectives investigating Robertson's death treated it as an isolated crime. In 1939, the Torso killer claimed to have killed a victim in Los Angeles, California. An investigation uncovered animal bones.
Headless people in boxcars.
In a swamp.
Yeah, kind of all over the place. So they were like, dang, is it the same guy?
Is it I think it'll go into more of suspects, but I think this would lead to more of could this be multiple people?
Yeah, because it's so spread out. You know, it's Ohio and Pennsylvania.
In, like, different spots of, like...
Yeah, so now they really know nothing because they're like,
well...
is there more than one? What are we doing?
On August 24th, 1939, a Cleveland resident named Frank Dozal, 52, was arrested as a suspect in Florence Palillo's murder. He later died in suspicious circumstances in the Cuyahoga County Jail. Most investigators considered the last canonical murder to have been in 1938. One suspected individual was Dr. Francis E. Sweeney. Born May 5, 1894, Sweeney was a veteran of World War I who was part of a medical unit that conducted amputations in the field. Sweeney was later personally interviewed by Eliot Ness, who oversaw the official investigation into the killings in his capacity as Cleveland's safety director. During this interrogation, Sweeney is said to have failed to pass 2 very early polygraph machine tests. Both tests were administered by polygraph expert Leonard Keeler, who told Ness he had his man. Ness apparently felt there was little chance of attaining a successful prosecution of the doctor, especially as he was the first cousin of one of Ness's political opponents, Congressman Martin L. Sweeney, who had hounded Ness publicly about his failure to catch the killer. After Sweeney committed himself, there were no more leads or connections that police could assign to him as a possible suspect. From his hospital confinement, Sweeney sent threatening postcards and harassed Ness and his family into the 1950s. Sweeney died in a veterans hospital in Daytona on July 9, 1964. In 1997, another theory postulated that there may have been no single butcher of Kingsbury Run because the murders could have been committed by different people. This was based on the assumption that the autopsy results were inconclusive. First, Cuyahoga County Coroner Arthur J. Pierce may have been inconsistent in his analysis as to whether the cuts on the bodies were expert or slapdash. Second, his successor Samuel Gerber, who began to enjoy press attention from his involvement in such cases as the Sam Shepard murder trial, garnered a reputation for sensational theories. Therefore, the only thing known for certain was that all the murder victims were dismembered.
Okay, so they have a couple suspects,
but they're just not sure.
It's just not going well. So
does it ever?
No. I don't think so. So their first suspect died.
Mm-hmm.
Little fishy.
Suspicious circumstances.
That's a little fishy.
Yup.
I'm really rooting for Sweeney, just because he seems really sketchy.
Yeah. Well, he was
I don't like
doctor.
That guy. Yeah, so
like
he would know how to like cut people apart, and all these people were dismembered, and like it could be similar to like being amputated. You know?
Yeah.
Like, he knew how to cut them apart, but it just seems like it was too easy. Like,
that's why Ness, I think, doesn't feel like
he was the guy. He probably thinks that thought that the torso murder was probably a lot smarter because he was able to evade them for so long, but also like put dead bodies outside of his office.
Yeah.
Like, so he's probably like, I don't know, doesn't seem quite right.
He's like the only real, like...
Yeah, I think out of the suspects that they have, he's the best bet, but I feel like it was somebody else. With a lot of stories that we've talked about, like, there wasn't a lot, and they kind of just, like, gave up on the case, so to speak. But you would think they wouldn't, because the torso murder, the Cleveland torso killer, is, like, such a huge story. And you're telling me that all these criminal justice major people haven't solved it yet? I feel like there's someone that we're missing, though. Like, there's got to be somebody else. Whether it was someone who's part of a group or just somebody else in general. Let us know in the comments down below if you have any ideas, if you think it was, like, any of the suspects we mentioned.
Or you know who done it.
Yeah, if you've done your own research and you are like, I know who did it, let us know, because I really want to know. Also, let us know if you think that the Lady of the Lake was a part of, or one of the victims of the torso killer. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe to this video, so that way we know if you're enjoying our content.
Turn on that post notification bell. Social media down.
Oh yeah, go follow us on our social media. You know, we don't post that often because we're bad at it. We will see you guys next Friday. Peace.